Hi, I'm Marius from MWest Photography, and welcome back to another episode of Digital Photography Today, the show where you will learn how to become the master of your camera. Now, in the previous episode, we discussed HDR photography, and specifically, we talked about how to capture good quality source images, because when you do HDR, you need to bracket your images. So you either have maybe 3 exposures or 7 exposures or 9 exposures, and you want them to look good. So when you bring them into your HDR software, you get an awesome looking picture. Okay, now we talked about using a tripod so that we know our images when it goes to longer exposures, it's maybe a few seconds, you do not have image shake. We talked about using a cable release so that you don't touch your camera. We also talked about turning off the image stabilizer on your lens, because when your camera is on a tripod, a lot of your lenses and cameras don't like that. So I always turn that off. And then we talked about the settings on the camera, keeping the ISO low, using aperture priority so that our images have got consistent depth of field. And then also something I didn't mention in the previous episode, which is also very important, is if you take pictures of, say, landscapes or maybe buildings or anything where there might be trees or stuff moving around, just be careful with that, because you'll notice the moment the wind is blowing very hard and those branches and everything and those leaves are moving around a lot, obviously all your pictures are going to look different, or the leaves are going to be on different locations in every image. So when you overlay them, it looks a bit funny. It looks like you can see all the ghosting of the different leaves on top of each other. So usually when I do this, I look at the weather and I see, okay, it's not too windy tomorrow, I'll go do it tomorrow. Or I just wait until like a big gust of wind is just passed, and then I'll take the HDR image. Okay, now we're going to talk about the software side. We've got, I'm going to use 3 images, and I'm going to show you how we are going to put all those images together. Now, something I also mentioned is that I'm set in my ways when I find something that works. So there are tons of HDR software out there, but what I use is a program called Photomatix Pro. So I don't change unless something really good comes out and I say, okay, I think it's about time I make a move to the software. So I use Photomatix Pro. I don't do a ton of work in here. Also, that I don't want to make stuff look unreal. Sometimes people overdo their HDRs and immediately know, whoa, okay, this is HDR. Ugh, those colors, it doesn't look that good. So I try to keep it subtle so that someone might just think, whoa, damn, this exposure is good. I don't want people to immediately think, oh, this is an HDR. If you tell them it's HDR, I must actually say, wow, well, you did it so well. So I'm going to show you how I bring it into Photomatix, how I merge it. Then I take it over to Photoshop, because in Photoshop I've got control over basically everything. If a building is skew, I can straighten it. If there's marks I need to clone out, I can use the clone tool. I can control the contrast, the colors, I can sharpen it, I can resize it. Basically you can do anything in Photoshop. So I just want to get a proper source file to work with that's merged all my exposures together, and then I'm happy with working in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to take from my second screen, I'm going to drag in 9 exposures that I did from inside a building. So when I drag it in here, you'll see what would you like to do with the dragged files. And I'm going to say merge for HDR processing. Click OK. Here you can see all the pictures. I'm going to say OK. Then you're going to get a screen like this. Now I can take align source images off. It doesn't really matter if I keep it on or turn it off. My pictures were on a tripod, but it doesn't do anything to the pictures. I just keep it there. Maybe if I bumped into my tripod, I may be turning around or something, I kicked against a tripod, then at least that specific set of pictures, it will align for me. So I don't really bother with that. I just keep this on. This is one I do take off, the reduce ghosting artifacts. I had it turned on because it makes sense. It gets rid of ghosting artifacts. But the problem is around sections where I maybe had light near an edge of something, like for instance on one of the Audi cars where the light is shining, I could see it made like a dark, almost like a blemish on that section that I didn't like. And I didn't know what it was until I turned this off, and it's okay, that's what it was. So I never use it again. Okay, so this I don't use. In a previous episode, I told you that you do get extra noise when you do HDR, so I keep the reduce noise on. And then I also keep the reduce chromatic aberrations on. Now you do get some extra color in your picture that looks unreal most of the time with HDR. Like you might have a little bit too much magenta, too much cyan, or too much green or yellow. It does happen, but that's why I go to Photoshop, so that I can pull those colors out with hue saturation, just to make it a little bit more subdued, is the word I think I want to use, just more subtle, so it doesn't look so over the top, so people don't necessarily think it is HDR. Okay, so then I'm going to click on OK. Now, if you've got a very slow PC, this can take time. If your PC is fast, it goes pretty quickly. It reads all the pictures, it reduces noise, it does a chromatic aberration and everything. And obviously, the more pictures you have here, the longer it will take. But usually this doesn't take more than a minute. It's usually way less than a minute for those 9 pictures. Obviously, you might have 3 pictures, or you might have 7 or 9, but it does take a little bit longer if you've got more pictures. There it's now busy aligning everything, and it's busy generating the HDR image. Now, like I said, I don't want to do too much in Photomatix. You can control like your white point, your black point, basically like you do with levels, your contrast and everything. But I want to rather get a high quality TIFF file and then move that to Photoshop than do too much in here. Okay, so if we look at this image, you can see if you compare that to the original image, you've got a lot of detail inside this building, as well as you can see everything outside. So it looks really good. I'm going to hide this histogram here, so it's not in the way of this section, and we can see the image nicely. I'm not going to rotate the image here because it's going to auto rotate when we bring it into Photoshop, so I'm just going to work it like this. I just want to see what the picture looks like. Now here you've got a process called tone mapping and exposure fusion. 99% of the time I just use tone mapping. I keep it on details enhancer, and then I usually just use the settings. I can actually close this tone settings here. I don't really use these that much. I focus more only on these, and sometimes the smoothing as well. Now with the strength, I can increase the strength on this one. You'll notice every time I change a setting, the image updates here as well. Now the color saturation, if I push it like really far, you'll notice the colors will go totally over the top. That's too much. I do like that yellow light that's happening there, and I do like the colors here on the wall. It's just outside it's bothering me a little, so I'm going to bring that down. It was on, I think, 46 or 40 something. Let's see what this looks like. This looks a lot better. I'm going to go a little bit less. There we go. Then the luminosity, that's your brightness values. If you go to this side, to the minus side, the picture will become darker. If you go to the plus side, and I'm really pushing the sliders pretty far so that you can see exactly where it's going, I a lot of the time add more light. So I'll brighten it because it's going to give me more to play with in Photoshop, but this is too bright. So let's see what this looks like. Okay, that I like. Now the micro contrast, if you go to this side again, it's going to brighten the image. If you go to the minus side, which sounds weird because if you minus, you usually go darker. Okay, so if you go to the plus side, you'll see the image will go darker, and then obviously 0 is what we had is in the middle right here. So this is what we had. So I'm going to make it a little darker rather, but only slightly, not too much. Okay, so this is my end result. Now, I really like this. So I'm going to process here in the bottom because I'm done. Process, then it's going to say a tone mapping using details enhancer, exactly what we chose. So here we've got our finished HDR. I'm going to go to save as, and then I'm just going to click save. It's already set to TIFF file. Save, and then I'm going to double click on that image so that Photoshop CS5 opens up, and then like I said, it will automatically put it in the right proportion or orientation. It goes to the correct portrait, not landscape view. Okay, now the first thing I notice here, I don't want to spend too much time on every picture because this video will become terribly long. So the first thing I want to do is I want to use the ruler tool and just straighten this because I can see this section is skew. I'm going to use this window here as a guideline to work on so that I can see how skew it is. I'm going to click on straighten here at the top, and that already looks better. It actually almost looks like it's a little bit skewed to the other side now, which is funny. Let's just try that again. Okay, maybe that looks better. Okay, then I'm also going to crop it a little. Okay, there we go. Now the rest I want to do, it's not a ton of work I want to do on this image. It really came out pretty good. Like I said, it looks subtle. It doesn't look over the top HDR. This is the only thing that's really giving it away, are these neon greens and yellows in the tree there. So I'm going to make it a little darker here. And I already like that just by taking the black point here under the levels tool. Now to get levels I pressed Ctrl and L. We already did that in a previous episode. And then I'm going to make it a little brighter and then maybe a little darker again. Now I can click on the preview here. It'll show me the before and then the after. Like I said, subtle, but it looks good. I'm going to go to OK, and then I'm going to press Ctrl and U, which will bring up the U saturation tool. Now important here, like I said, sometimes you do get colors in the picture that you do not want. So what I like to do is go to the master here at the top, click on that, and go to say to magentas. Now if I take the saturation all the way to the top, it will show me where those magentas are. Now if I look at that, the magentas in this picture really doesn't bother me that much. I'm not really going to worry about them. You'll see in the other images sometimes there are colors you don't want, or maybe it was cyans you don't like, and you can search for them just by using the slider, going to the plus side and seeing where those cyans are. Because if you take them to the minus side, sometimes they're going to desaturate. It will lose all their color, so that sometimes messes up your picture. That's why I take the slider and just run through it, see where those colors are. Now I know the color in here which is bothering me is this. It just looks a bit too neon. So I can go to my greens. I know there's greens in there, and I can also see yellows in there. So I take the slider to the plus, you'll see those greens will really start to show up there. So I'm going to take the saturation slider a little bit to the minus. I'm going to go to the yellows, do the same. Here you can see all the yellows. I'm going to desaturate that as well. And then that looks a lot more natural. Now here's the preview. So if I click on that, there's the before, and there's the after. So the room stays the same. I'm just controlling that outside to make sure it doesn't look over the top. And then I'm going to click on OK. And then I can still, if I want to in this picture, I can sharpen it. I can go in for detail, clean it up a little bit. But this I'm happy with. I'm just going to go File, Save, click on JPEG, and then just save that image. And then I am done. And now if you look at the screen, you can see the before and the after. And we did a really subtle but good job by just merging them quickly and then just doing a few adjustments on Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to close this and this as well. Then we can go to our next image, which is of an Audi R8. I'm going to drag those exposures in from the second screen, click OK, and I'm going to leave this. I don't need to change anything here. It's already set up. I'm going to click OK again, and the program will now start to merge everything for us. Okay, there's generating the HDR. It's reducing the chromatic aberrations. Okay, there we've got our shot. Now, what I like to do, if I change from one shoot to the other, I like to set this to the default by going to presets here and just say default, so that I know I'm starting with a new bunch of settings here, because obviously every shoot will be different. Okay, I'm going to close this here, and you also notice in the bottom it's got a bunch of also preset effects that you can already just click on and see what it looks like. I usually don't like to do these or to use these. I want to make my own. So with this, again, I can use the strength. If I go to the minus side, you'll see you lose quite a lot of detail here. So that's why I like to work with a higher strength, which means I then also have more detail in the highlights and the shadows. So I do normally use a very high strength. Then with this color saturation, there's a ton of color in here that I don't like. There's lots of yellows and stuff on the board from the signs from the building. So if I increase the color saturation, you'll notice it doesn't look that good. I'm not going to make that too high, but I'm going to take those colors out later in Photoshop. Now when I'm increasing the luminosity, it's going to make these colors here look even worse. So I might even bring down the saturation a little. I don't like all those yellow colors. Okay, then the micro contrast, I can either go to the darker side or to the lighter side. Let's go to the darker side, which is this side. Maybe too much. Okay, I think that looks good. And then I just click on Process. And then it's done. And here we've got our image. I just say File, Save As, click on Save, double click on the TIFF file. My Photoshop immediately pops open. Now here again, I usually start with levels, which will be Control plus L. And I'll play with the contrast a little. And some extra photography tip. You'll notice I've got these nice like sparkles coming off the lights here. That's intentional, and how you do that is when you take a picture and you use a very high aperture number, like for instance say f18 or f22 or something like that, you'll notice that this happens automatically. So if you do a long exposure at night, if you look at your street lamps, you'll also see those street lamps will have these nice sparkles on them. So if you want to do that, you've never have been able to get it right, just use a higher aperture number and you're sorted. Okay, so here's our before, here's our after. I like that. Click on OK. Then again go to use saturation, because if I look at this image I can see here some magentas here that I don't like. There's also some cyans in here I'm not that happy about. So I'm going to go to the master here at the top, go to magentas, and if I pull it you can see those on the ground. If I take it to the minus side I can take it away completely, you won't even notice it was there. And then the blues, let's see, there's some blues in there as well. I'm going to minus it. It took the blues away. I want it to look like proper tar, like road. I don't want you to see weird shades in that you don't want. The cyan as well, I can make it a little bit less. Because if I look here, when it's almost at 0 here, you see this right here. If I drag it down a little bit, it's not as harsh, and there's also that flare right there. Okay, now greens, I'm not going to worry about yellows. Definitely yellows here. Make it a little bit less. Now it's not as over the top. Just want to make sure I don't lose too much color on the car's body here, but the color of the car is silver. So even if I drag it out, you'll notice the color on the car is only the light falling from all the boards and the signs and everything here. I don't want to take it away completely. I just don't want to see it as yellow. So I think I'm going to go to say around there. So with the colors, with all the settings we did, there's a preview, there's the before, and there's the after. Okay, then I'm going to click on OK at the top, and then I can still, like I said, clone out some marks. I can sharpen this. I can maybe crop it a little. Something I think which will look good on this is maybe some vignetting. So I can add a new layer. I can go to my gradient tool and then bring in some vignetting from the sides. Now if you want to be able to do more of this in Photoshop, understand Photoshop a lot better, if I drop the opacity here, you can see I can control the edges of the vignette. If you want to know more about Photoshop, you can go to my website, mwest.co.za, and you can click on Shop, and then you'll see I've got some Photoshop for everyone training for Elements and for CS, beginners and advanced. That will show you all about layers and all about like vignetting and cloning and cropping and all those crazy stuff that people love to do. Okay, so if I click on this eye here, I can see the before and the after. So you see it's very subtle, but it just makes those edges look good. Okay, so when I'm done, File, Save As, and then JPEG. And then there I've got my shot. Okay, I'm going to close this one. Now the next one is one I really like, and it's one I did at Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens. Now it was a tricky shot because the water, this was only 3 exposures. The water, there was a little bit of light falling on the whitest section of the water, the little bubbles. And you can't get detail all around you on like the branches and the greens and the rocks and everything. You just can't get detail all over the place and still expect those little white bubbles with the ambient light that was available there, everything to just work out perfectly. So what I did was I did this HDR on a tripod. I think one of the exposures was a second, and that's also why you'll see the water's got this nice moving flow here. It's because of the frame, it was a long exposure. But you'll notice, I'm just going to first reset this. You'll notice here on all those little bubbles, there's a ton of little bubbles in there, and lots of detail. That I lost when I just tried to take a picture. And all these colors here just didn't punch as much as it does on this shot. So here, HDR really did an awesome job. And you wouldn't think it was HDR when you see the final end results. So again, I'm going to my strength. You'll notice if I take it down, you'll see these bubbles will wash out. If I take it all the way to 0, this is basically what happened on the original shot. The bubbles, the exposure, it just couldn't handle all those little details, including all this. So I'm going to take my strength up. I want all those details, and immediately, boom, it looks great. And then the saturation, again, I don't want it to look like this. I don't want it to be over the top. I want it to look natural. So I'm not going to add too much saturation in here, but I do like it when those greens are nice and bright. Then the luminosity, I can brighten up a little bit. Let's look at that. Can usually, like I said, when I add luminosity, sometimes the saturation looks too much. So now you just take that slider down again a little bit to make it look more natural. I think that looks good. And again, I can use the micro contrast, go to this side, make it brighter, go to that side, make it darker. I'm actually thinking of a little bit darker. I don't want to lose too much here in the shadow areas, but I do want to add a little bit more darkness in there. And then we're done. So I'm going to go to process here. And then file, save as. We just save it, then double click on it. Photoshop CS5 opens up. Now, if you look at the before that we had, if you just look at that compared to this, it's already, this is a masterpiece compared to the original shot. So what I want to do with this is I want to make it a square crop. I think it'll really look good with a square crop. So I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool, but to make sure it's a square, you'll notice it's free transforming here. You can go here to style, say fixed ratio, and make it a 1-to-1 ratio. It'll do exactly the same. Or you just hold down the shift key. You'll notice it's now going as a straight, perfect square, basically. I'm going to drag it from the one side to the other. There, I've got my perfect square. I go to image, I go to crop, and that's done. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see more. Then I'm going to go to Control L, take me to levels, get a little bit more contrast in here. There's the before, there's the after, looks awesome. Click on OK, go to Control U, brings up my U saturation for me. Now again, I can go here to say the greens, and maybe the greens are too much. Then I can play around with the greens here, and I can make the greens the way I want the greens to be. I can also go to the yellows. There's a ton of yellow in here. Control the yellows, make it more natural. Sometimes, like I said, you can look in an image and it might not seem that there are magentas in here, but yes, some magentas. So if I want to, I can make sure they don't show up by just desaturating them a little. The same with, say, cyans. There might be some cyans in here. There'll definitely be blues in here. Now this, I don't want to have cyan in there. I don't want it to be grayscale either, but a little bit maybe more subtle. The same with the blues. There will be a ton of blue in the water. Can make it a little bit more subtle. And then obviously I can do some cloning in here. I can also sharpen this. And other than that, as you can see, very quick. Looks awesome. If you compare this to the original that was on the camera, especially the one that I'm showing you now where all the bubbles are blown out and there's just no detail. This is just one of the 3 exposures. Obviously, this is not the best the camera could do, but just look at that water. It looks terrible. Okay, so when you're done, File, Save As, JPEG, Save. Okay, boom, you're done. Okay, so that's that for HDR. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Now that you know how to set up the camera properly, you've got an idea of the software. I hope you create some awesome HDR pictures. And remember, do not make them too over the top, because that's usually too much. People don't like it unless it's something you really want to make it look funky, like maybe you're taking a picture of a sports car, almost like this picture of the Audi R8 that I did. This I really pushed it to make it look really good, and of all those mist on the lights and everything, for this picture I decided I'm gonna go all out. It can look HDR. The comments I got was, damn, this looks like it's coming from Need for Speed or something, like a video game. So sometimes you do want to go that route, but if you can make it look natural, why not? So yeah, have fun. If you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. Subscribe, get all the awesome videos as they come out, and then I'll see you in the next episode of Digital Photography Today, the show where you will learn definitely how to become the master of your camera. Bye.